Hey y'all, welcome back to another episode of the PWYFA Play Where Your Feet Are podcast. I'm your host Cameron Dobbs, and today we have a super special episode because we are joined by Dr. Emily Schultz. Now, Dr. Emily, I met when I was severely concussed in the fall of 2019 because she was actually my vestibular therapist. So this episode is so special because now we're interacting face-to-face or Zoom to Zoom with her not seeing me severely injured. It's so fun now to be on the other side and actually building a relationship and a friendship post-injury. Now, Emily, I'm having on the podcast because she plays where her feet are in a daily basis. She did such a great job making an impact in the workplace as she impacted me, and I know she does so with so many other people. So she talks about that on the podcast today. She speaks a lot about brain injuries, neurological things, vestibular therapy, and more, which I'll have to say, I've had 5 concussions at this point, and so I know a great deal about brain injuries, but she gives so much more perspective, and her medical perspective plus my personal perspective make this episode so great. She also speaks on how Play Where Your Feet Are is about doing your best, but also learning to give yourself grace. Y'all, this is such a good episode. I can't wait for you to hear the conversation, but before we begin, make sure you are subscribed here below to the Play Where Your Feet Are podcast on YouTube and following us on all social media platforms. We don't want you to miss a thing, whether it is merchandise. I usually have a rack here, but we did a shoot this morning, so it's not today. Whether it's merchandise, book updates, podcast things, and so much more. Don't miss a thing, and make sure you're following us on social media. But guys, we're so excited to dive in with Dr. Emily Schultz today. Enjoy Season 1, Episode 7. This is the PWYFA Play Where Your Feet Are podcast, and I'm your host, Cameron Dobbs. Hi, Emily.
Hi.
How are you?
I am good. I am thriving in the fall weather. So
Yes, and explain that a little bit because I know you from Emily living in Miami, but what are you up to right now?
I am home visiting my family, particularly celebrating my grandpa's early birthday. He's going to be 102 in a couple weeks. So I'm home in Overland Park, Kansas, just having a nice weekend with family and embracing chilly weather, which we don't get too much of in Miami. So I am trying to be my most basic fall self for the next 36 hours.
I love it. Yes, you got to soak it all in because like you said, we certainly don't get that in Miami. We don't get the weather of it and we don't get the the scenery change of it as well. You know, it's all green, it's all palm trees all year round, which is not a bad thing in Miami, but we certainly don't get the pretty fall leaves that everywhere else seems to get.
Yes.
That's awesome. And you got some other exciting things and fun things going on in your life as well because you are engaged and you're planning a wedding. So give me some wedding updates. Where are we at?
We actually just 2 days ago finalized all of our major vendors for our big day, which has been crazy. 2022 wedding planning is insane just because there's so many weddings gonna be happening that year. And so we're getting married out in California, Temecula Valley. So it's been a lot of and back and forth with people and kind of trying to figure out, who we want to be on our team for our big day when we're not necessarily there to physically meet with people. So it's been a different adventure, a different challenge. But yeah, just on Thursday, we finalized all of our major vendors. So we're in a very good place for our wedding next fall.
Yay, that's so exciting. Oh my goodness. And it's next October, right?
Yep, October 28th, 2022.
Oh, love that. Almost a year to date. Almost a year.
Yeah, which it seems crazy to have to even do all this stuff so early, but it's just, it's a lot for wedding season. So kudos to everyone in that industry because I'm sure they're slammed right now.
Yeah.
With people like me seeking out stuff really, really early. So it's, a nice sigh of relief to just be like, okay, we've got this done. And then get to hop on some of the fun details and stuff. So
Yes.
it's been a fun process to pace it out, not feel rushed with anything, that's for sure.
That's awesome. And you already have your dress too, right?
Yes, I do have the dress. So it's things are shaping up really nicely. Very, very exciting stuff.
Oh, I love that so much. Well, guys, for you all listening, how I even know Emily, how we even got connected was through very unfortunate circumstances. But I'm so glad I got to know her. But when I was severely concussed in the fall of 2019, with my third concussion in 1 year, which we've all heard the story by now. And if you haven't, you can go back and watch episode 1, the backstory. But I was sent to vestibular therapy, and Emily was my PT. And it's really funny because I look back at those moments, even when I was just told about vestibular therapy, and I was warned so much about how terrible vestibular therapy is. Like, I was told by everyone, like, you're going to hate it. Like, it's awful. You're going to feel terrible. And which symptom wise was kind of true. I mean, it was not the easiest thing ever. It really breaks you down and it's really hard. And we'll talk about that. We'll talk about everything about vestibular therapy. But I mean, even with all that, meeting Emily was really made the experience so worth it, because Emily was such a bright light in that terribly dark time of my life. She cared for me so much. And out of all the doctors, all the medical people I was working with, it was such a breath of fresh air to deal with a medical person who cared about you more than just a number or a to-do list on their schedule for the day. I mean, Emily really cared about me as a person more than just a client. And it was really awesome to just be able to build our relationship during that time and now be able to connect again, because we did work together for a few months and then was cut off. And again, we'll go through this whole story, but eventually was cut off and we didn't talk much. I mean, I updated her occasionally just as I was feeling better, as I was healing, but really didn't talk for like a year and are now getting connected again. So this is just such a sweet episode to me. I know it's a sweet episode to her, being able to talk with me not wearing sunglasses and earplugs and headphones and all this crazy stuff attached to me. But that we can just reflect on this experience and highlight the wonderful work that she does, because she is one that is a huge role model for anyone and everyone, and should be, because she does play where her feet are in everything that she does. So Emily, talk to us. What do you exactly do? I know you have a ton of important roles and so many incredible jobs and work that you do, but I know I would butcher it if I even tried to explain everything. So tell us exactly what some of your titles are and what you're doing now.
Yeah. So I am a neurologic physical therapist. I'm a board certified neurologic clinical specialist in physical therapy. And I'm also recently a certified telehealth rehabilitation practitioner. I work at the University of Miami in our outpatient neuro rehab team. As part of my role, I'm in clinical care, so I'm kind of split time between doing some telehealth, which was a new role, obviously, thrust upon the medical world in the last, year and a half, 2 years. And then I'm half in clinic still. Outside of those hours, I'm core faculty and a mentor in our neurologic residency program that we have through the University of Miami and Jackson Rehab Hospital. Um, I am a former graduate of the University of Southern California and Rancho Los Amigos Neurologic Rehab Center Neuro Physical Therapy Residency Program, which is quite a mouthful. I am on the Academy of Neurologic Physical Therapy Telehealth Task Force. I do some adjunct teaching, still with USC through some remote activities. And then I recently just started to take on a case study. So translating neurologic physical therapy to telehealth for the management of a person with Parkinson's disease. So I'm all over the place a little bit, but I think it's just because I am so passionate about serving people who have neurologic diagnoses and really trying to foster that passion in people who are coming into the field behind me, and just really, really making sure that we can maximize the quality of care that we are providing to the people whose journeys we're a part of. So yeah, it's a mouthful.
I love it. I love it. And last time we were catching up, just kind of planning this podcast and talking about what we might speak about, you mentioned too, you were like, I just love neuro. I just love neuro. And that's why I'm excited to have you on this podcast too, because you love neuro, you're passionate about it, you're passionate about your patients, you're passionate about the research, you're passionate about sharing knowledge and not only growing your own knowledge, but teaching others the knowledge about neuro as well. And so I'm just excited because everyone listening, I mean, hang on with us through this episode because it's going to be, yes, one that probably has some sciencey words in it, but it's going to be something where you can really learn so much and take great things about it away. Because someone who has now gone through 3 concussions, vestibular therapy, like has post-concussive syndrome, I just am very passionate about this, obviously, but I also want to teach others a lot. And even when I don't have all the knowledge I would like to have, I'm appreciative of people like you that can share, because I think it is such a perspective change when, especially in the sports world, when not only those who go through concussions know about neuro, but those just in the sports world, in the industry, know more about neuro. I think it changes the game. I think it changes the way we talk about athletes. I think it changes the way we speak on injuries. And so I'm really appreciative. I think this podcast will be awesome. I'm so thankful for your knowledge and I'm excited to get started.
Yeah, me too. And I'm so glad you're doing this too. And I'm, obviously like very humbled and thankful to be a part of it. I just feel like, again, for people who are listening, post-concussive syndrome and concussion, it's considered what we call like an invisible diagnosis. So, this isn't stuff that there's necessarily outward signs or imaging doesn't necessarily show what's going on, but the people who are going through it feel the impact every single moment. Whether it's taking breaks, like just getting ready in the morning, or trying to get through a meal, like looking at your plate and looking up at somebody who's talking to you. These things that we really take for granted when we're not in the system of somebody that's coming through this type of recovery. And so I just feel like, if you know somebody going through this, if you are somebody going through this, if you're in the medical field, it's really important to like remember that and remember, the vulnerability of the person who's sitting in front of you. Because even though we can't see it, they very, very much can feel it. And as you mentioned in athletes, that can give you a big loss of identity during the time that you're going through. And that's something that's unimaginable unless you're experiencing it. So I'm glad you're doing this because I feel like it's a big thing to bring like awareness and recognition and empathy to your journey, and people who are going through the similar journey.
For sure. And I think it's just crazy thinking about how much concussions do impact everyday life and the little things, because, and it nowhere do I ever want to compare injuries, because that's one thing about going through a mental health injury as well. I mean, something that affects your brain and everything about it, chemicals around it and everything, is you do struggle with that loss of identity. You do struggle with that comparison aspect. But there are certainly different things where, someone who's on crutches with a leg injury doesn't necessarily always face with someone with a concussion. And it is those little things. Like I could barely even sit through conversations with people because my brain was just so exhausted. And I mean, not only did I have all these headaches and dizziness and confusion and brain fog and all this going on in my head anyway, but then when trying to keep up with conversations with people was so difficult, just to keep track of everything they were saying and then to process that because my brain function was slower. And then also just, like you said, the little things of looking around and keeping eye contact and things like that become so difficult. Everything that seemed so easy before becomes so difficult. And like you said, not everyone sees that because I'm not on crutches. I'm not with a cast. I'm not, showing, besides the fact that I was wearing sunglasses, earplugs, and headphones, like you can't really tell that I'm struggling besides that. So it really is such an interesting injury to go through and to learn about. And yeah, so let's do it. Let's just dive right into it. I mean, talk to us a little bit. Most people do know about concussions and they really think about probably headaches. They probably think maybe dizziness, confusion, or brain fog, but let's dive even more into it. So just talk to me a little bit about neurological injuries, concussions, and speak on a little bit of the symptoms that come with those.
Yeah, so concussions has gotten a lot of attention in the last years, which I think is a wonderful thing across the,
Thankfully.
for healthcare providers, for people having access to like more specialized care. So concussions are considered mild traumatic brain injuries, although I would say those who feel them do not think they are so mild, and we'll tell you from that. But they can occur from either direct or indirect impact to the head or the body. Putting some different types of torques or torsions on the brain. So the MRI or imaging typically doesn't show any type of injury or damage, but rather the pathological changes that are occurring reflect a functional disturbance in our nervous system rather than a structural one. And the functional connections in the brain are diffuse. They are, they're everywhere. Everything is very much so interconnected. And so what we see in people who have concussion is an impact sometimes on the cervical system. So musculoskeletally, we think about maybe our neck, our jaw. We can see impacts to the vestibular ocular system. So that's going to be maybe our perception of dizziness, where we are in space, how well our eyes are working and moving together. We see impacts on our autonomic nervous system, which regulates your fight or flight. It helps to keep homeostasis, and again, is so interconnected throughout our brain, throughout all of our systems. And then we see this metabolic mismatch, especially very acutely within the brain itself, meaning that the brain needs more energy, like right at that moment, to heal and to function during the day than what it is currently receiving. And then lastly, as you mentioned, we have that tied to the limbic system, which needs to be recognized. So that's our emotions and processing. And, again, the connections are diffuse, so the list goes on. But you can see with this functional disturbance, there's a vast amount of symptoms that people can experience. And obviously, these are unique to each individual. Everybody doesn't experience all of these. Some people experience only a few. Some people experience all of them. So what's causing the symptoms for one person may not be the same as what is causing the symptoms for someone else. But some of the common things we can see like right after an injury is, somebody very distractible or kind of like a vacant stare. They might be disoriented. Some gross like incoordination of their movements, memory impairments, headache, nausea, dizziness, and emotional lability. So kind of like those fluctuations in mood. And some symptoms, that can carry on past that like initial acute phase. It can be cognitive impairment, which can affect your memory, attention, concentration, reaction time, headache, which can have migraine features or not. Headache in and of itself is so vast, depending on what might be causing it. Balance impairment and dizziness, fatigue and fogginess, mood disruptions, sleep disturbance, amnesia surrounding the injury, difficulties with ocular motor coordination. So again, kind of pairing your eyes, and then overlaying all of that is that autonomic nervous system dysfunction, which explains a lot of the symptoms that I just listed, but also can be confounding other factors that are causing those symptoms. And basically what happens within that system is that the body is not responding to the environment as it should. And so you're in this imbalance of fight or flight and calm, and your body's not responding to the environment as it should. So as you can see, not mild, not a very mild injury. And you lived it. So yeah.
Yeah, I did live it, and I lived just about everything you just listed off. I remember, and one thing I actually want to say first is that you mentioned how it's different with every person, but even in my experience, it was different with each concussion. And so brain injuries are just so crazy, and getting hit in the head or having a blow to your head or body, even like you said,
each blow, each hit can even cause different symptoms too, and different reactions and different injuries as well. I mean, there are moments in a volleyball game where defensive players and people will get smacked in the face all the time. And there'll be times where we just laugh it off and it's totally fine. And there's no repercussion, there's no consequence at all. But then there are other moments where it was like my third concussion that I did a nice block move. I got nailed in the forehead and it didn't even quote unquote hurt that bad. It was an extremely powerful hit. I mean, I got nailed in the forehead and it bounced off my head and hit the ceiling of our arena. So pretty tough hit. But I mean, it just happened that hit me the wrong way. And that was the one to knock me out, you know? And my first concussion I collided with a teammate. My head went into her collarbone and tough, which by the way, feels like you hit a brick wall. But with that one, I had the symptoms of a concussion in terms of headache mainly and some dizziness. I mean, typical symptoms, but I didn't have nausea. I remember that. I didn't have nausea with my first one. And then my second one that I had in the spring, that following spring, I was really just dizzy the whole time. I had vertigo with it, but I never had headaches. And so that was even, you know, that second concussion of when I got elbowed into the head was different than the first concussion. And I'm still the same person. And then my third concussion was like, you name it, I had it. Like anything with a concussion you could ever think of, that was me in my third concussion. I mean, I was going to vestibular therapy, which we'll talk about, and you mentioned. I was going to cognitive therapy, which you briefly mentioned, just the cognitive symptoms as well, and psychological therapy, which you mentioned having the mental health symptoms as well, and the loss of identity and different things that you face with concussions. So I mean, I had anything and everything on the list you could possibly imagine, from headaches to dizziness to brain fog to irritability to lack of sleep or struggle sleeping, insomnia. I mean, literally anything and everything. I had it during that third concussion. So again, that is just showing though how every single concussion is so different. And so that is, I think, an important reason why we should learn about this and why we need to continue talking about it, because every impact to the brain, every hit to the head has different effects, not only in different people, but within the same people as well. And so let's talk. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think too, like you mentioned the severity of the symptoms don't always match the severity of the blow to the head either. And so there's a lot of factors. It's very individualized, and symptom resolution for people and maybe you experienced in your first concussions is usually like symptoms may subside like 7 to 10 days, but the brain in adults takes about 3 to 4 weeks to heal. So even though sometimes, like, especially in athletics, like we consider that a lot with return to sport, like your symptoms may be down, but your brain is still healing. And so then when we have these successive, concussive events in the environment where our brain is still healing, that really does predispose you to experience post-concussive syndrome, which I know is your journey after your third concussion. So again, typically that symptom resolution is 7 to 10 days, but 10 to 30% of people, which is kind of a broad percentage, but that's what it'll say in the literature, for 10 to 30% of people, that's not the case. And those are what we see in people journeying through post-concussive syndrome. And that's your story.
That is my story. And that's such a great point to point out, because that's a huge reason why I'm always advocating for my teammates and their stories as well, and their return to play, because it is so often that, of course, as an athlete, when you get injured, all you want to do is get back. And all your coaches want you to do is get back. And all your teammates want you to do is get back. And all your trainers, and I mean, anyone around you, obviously, they want you to get back to playing again, because that's what you love and that's what you enjoy doing, and that's what brings you joy, and that's what you do. And so everyone wants you to get back, and that's, of course, from a good place in their heart. Yeah. But there is that consideration, especially with brain injuries, that, like you said, even if you're quote unquote feeling better, you have to be sensitive to the fact that your brain is still healing. And so there is a point where you cannot push yourself. You cannot quote unquote push past the pain, even if there is none. Even if you're feeling just a slight headache or maybe just a little bit out of it, you cannot push past the pain. And that was one of the things that, as I was healing in the worst part of my injury, I remember having conversations with teammates that had gone through, Hannah, who you know, that had gone through concussions before me and ended up also medically retiring. And she was telling me, I mean, hey, you have to consider your future. You have to consider that, hey, one day my son might be playing in the state football or in the football state championship one day, and that's going to be lots of crowd noise, that's going to be bright stadium lights, that's going to be lots of noise and distractions and watching a game and tracking the ball and tracking your son run routes and do this and that and the other. And you have to make a decision now to see if you can go to that game in the future, because it is those lasting symptoms, and it is wondering or balancing the fact that, oh, I really want to play right now, but I know that my brain is still healing. I need to give it time to heal. And I know that the risk of potentially getting hit in the head again right now in this time period could be detrimental, even more detrimental than the things that I'm going through right now. And so I think the lasting effect of concussions and vestibular and neurological injuries is so critical to understand, especially as athletes and especially as those going through it, of course, as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a perfect example, perfect perspective too, right? Like a shift, which is almost impossible to imagine when you're, a student athlete, right? To
Yes.
shift outside of the moment of, this is for my team and I'm giving everything for my team because that's what you've done, and say, like, I'm going to give everything to myself. I'm giving everything to myself right now and to my future. And that shift is hard, but that shift is beautiful in so many ways, as you continue through life.
Yeah, it is so hard. And I think as athletes, a lot of times, and this may almost sound like contradictory or controversial even, but I feel like athletes are so selfless. Oftentimes you do think of, they have such big egos and they're given this and that and the other, and they're given full scholarships and all that maybe society will see that they're so selfish. But you really do, especially in team sports. I mean, you really do give everything to your teammates, and you push through the pain and you push through the exhaustion and you push past your limits. But there comes a point to where you have to advocate for yourself. And that's not something that we're used to doing our entire lives. And it's certainly not something, we're taught to be tough and to push through it all and to give it all and leave it all on the court and this and that and the other. But you have to reframe your perspective of what tough really is. And that's something that with Canes volleyball, toughness is actually one of our values. That we have 3 values, and toughness is one of them. And we define toughness as being good anyway. So it's no longer, I have this ankle injury that's hurting, but we got to win this game and I'm going to go in there and I'm going to play for my teammates and do that and this and the other. And yes, sure, that's awesome at some points, but there's also a fine line that needs to be drawn, that sometimes being good anyway is actually advocating for yourself, pulling yourself out of the game, healing for yourself so that you can either heal, take the right time to recover, and then get back on the court. Or like in my case, you have to take time to yourself to step away, to heal for maybe several months, and then just be able to live a normal life again. And that is so hard to be able to feel like you're betraying your team and stepping away, but it really is the best possible thing for yourself. And that's something that, like I said, we're not used to being quote unquote selfish, even though that sounds so ridiculous, because it's like, letting your brain heal and living a normal life again. That doesn't sound selfish at all. And it's not selfish at all, but it is, like you said, it's a perspective shift, and it's a life-changing perspective shift as well. Just learning to advocate for your own body, your own health, knowing how to put in place boundaries and how to say no to things too. I mean, in the very minimal thing, that's one of the greatest things I'm still learning to do, but is to say no to things and to say no to great opportunities, because it means I need to get more than 5 hours of sleep every night, just like even in the little things. But let's return back to our conversation and go back to all your knowledge here, and I'll stop my little rant here. But let's talk about vestibular therapy, because that is how I really knew you, or how I got connected to you. And so let's just talk about that. I mean, what in the world is vestibular therapy? What does vestibular even mean? And what did all that entail?
Yeah, so vestibular therapy is definitely, it's a component of recovery, right? We mentioned all of the other systems that are impacted. And so in a typical physical therapy evaluation, as you experienced, like it's typically over the course of multiple days because the symptoms are so high and things can get flared up so easily, where we assess and we piece through these different symptoms. But a lot of, what you were going through was kind of in that vestibular ocular realm. So we think about this as symptoms of dizziness, maybe vertigo, nausea, lightheadedness, blurred vision, double vision, difficulty tracking objects, photophobia, right? Like the lights come on and I don't like it, where you had your sunglasses on. Motion sensitivity, eye strain or eye ache. So like even just moving the eyes causes like a lot of pressure. Eyebrow ache with eye movements. Like a lot of people will get like really kind of like sharp or constant pains right in this eyebrow region. And then also gait and instability or postural instability. Our vestibular system is one of our primary balance systems. So it operates both peripherally with a little system in our inner ear, which can be affected from the blow of the concussion itself, right? We can have, I'm sure everyone at some point has heard about like the crystals in your inner ear and they move to the wrong place and you get vertigo. So that's like a very basic summary of kind of like what can happen in your peripheral nervous system. But then there's also central components too. So how that peripheral nervous system connects into your brain, to your central nervous system, and how you process info. And so that helps to regulate your balance responses, knowing where your head and your body is in space at any time, how your head and your body relates to the environment around you, both when you're not moving, but particularly when you're moving. And then also has very, very close ties and connections with our ocular system. So how you're seeing, how you can shift gaze from one thing to the other. And coordinating essentially your eye movements that we do every day. And I feel like that one is oftentimes really, we take that for granted. I take that for granted. So I think the system, the vestibular ocular system in and of itself, can have some very, very impactful and complicated symptoms for somebody going through a recovery of concussion. And in your experience, your headache on top of everything was really an impact to tolerating, some of the exercises. And so then it's a careful tease out between how much is safe to push, which might be a little bit more in something that's just like truly vestibular. But on top of the fact that you need to go through the rest of your day without feeling like your head is like on fire, right? You're like, so that made it, it's a very, very unique balance between all of these factors essentially coming in at the same time. And knowing how to grade in some of the therapy exercises to make sure that they're beneficial rather than just confounding on top of some of the other symptoms that you were experiencing.
Yeah. And I remember the meetings that we had with you. I think I would see you 2 or 3 times a week was kind of the routine we had. And we did different exercises together and you sent me home with some homework as well. And it's so funny is certainly not the word, pathetic, maybe even a better word of like, I mean, the things that you have to try to do though. And it's from the exercises of, I remember I had a ruler and a sticky note on top of that ruler and it had a little X on the sticky note. And I had to like slowly bring it closer to me and slowly bring it away from me and just keep my eyes on that X. And that was so hard. And like, I couldn't do it. And then we had the X's on the wall where I would have like 2 sticky notes, one on top of each other, again, with the little X in the middle. And it was just staying completely still with my body, but moving my eyes up and down and then doing that same thing, but side to side. And then we had a tennis ball in a pillowcase And that one was terrible.
That was ghosty, right? Didn't we
Yeah,
name?
yeah, that was ghosty. That was terrible. I hated that one. But
Yeah.
you had to spin it basically and catch it in your other hand and just watch that motion. And that was, I remember feeling absolutely so dizzy with that one. And then I remember the one exercise we did that we were like, okay, never again, was the grocery store experience. I remember that day. My dad was with me that day, and it was literally like I don't know if it was on YouTube or what, but it was a video of basically someone wearing like a GoPro on their head and just going through the grocery store. And going back to how you said, just the simple things in life, you kind of have to relearn how to do. And it was, again, someone walking through the grocery store, and you just imagine yourself walking through the grocery store, and you're looking left, then you're looking right, and then you're looking forward, then you're looking down at your cart, and then you're walking at the same time, and you're hearing all this noise, and you're hearing different conversations, and you're hearing things over the loudspeaker. And when you're concussed, those things are multiplied by millions, and you don't realize you're not able to, it's like you're not able to focus on one thing at a time. Mm-hmm. Because you automatically just hear every single conversation going on, and you can't focus on any of them because you're hearing all of them, but every single conversation just blows up your mind and increases your symptoms. And so I remember we did that one that day, and we were like, okay, yeah, we're not going back to that.
Too early. Yeah, too early. And I think, we're looking at like those exercises are optokinetic exercises. And so it's like how you can take in your visual environment when there's a lot there to process. And a lot of times, even on mute, if you take out like the noises, like that stimulation, that sensory input is overwhelming. And the reason we look at that and we screen it is because like that's everyday life. And I remember you were talking to me at one point too about just like walking on the sidewalk and like at campus, like, you have people coming around you have side conversations, you have, the noise of Miami traffic, like honking horns, and all of that. And just being in an environment where there's so much sensory input and your system not being able to like process through it appropriately, rather just all compounds on top of each other and makes you feel horrible. And so that at that point, when we were working together, like, we realized very quickly, like not even a minute into that exercise of like, we're not here yet. We are not here yet. We need to back this off. But you can think about then, like, you can avoid that as an exercise in rehab, but you can't avoid that in your everyday. When you're trying to fulfill your life roles and find joy and just function. So it's definitely a balancing act between like what is safe and appropriate to stimulate somebody within rehab, knowing what is required of them outside of the four walls that I see them in.
For sure. And I remember, and one of the other things we did was I would try to walk on the treadmill for about like 10 minutes a day, those 3 times a week that I saw you. And I remember that was so hard because we were managing, like you mentioned, we were managing my headaches because I constantly had a headache. It wasn't that I ever did not have a headache, but it was the fact of, okay, my headache's a level 5, 6, 7, 8, whatever it may be. Can we just keep it there? Can we not let it increase? That was our goal, to not let anything get worse. And then we also had to monitor my heart rate at the same time. And I remember one day, I don't know if you remember this or not, but this was like, I vividly remember this, how I was in that back corner of the room, treadmill, like on the wall, against the wall. And it got to a point where I was probably walking like 1 mile. I probably went under 1 mile per hour. Like it was so incredibly slow. And I just remember you like in the most solemn, sad voice ever, just being like, come on down. Like it's at this point, like you're going so slow, it's probably making you worse. Like it's probably harder, the fact that you're going so slow. And we took me off the treadmill that day and we didn't do treadmill. And that was just like like so sad of a moment of just being like, I'm not even there yet. Like I'm not even the point where I can walk faster than 1 mile per hour on the treadmill for 10 minutes yet. I just remember that was such a hard day for me.
Yeah. And with the heart rate, that, you bring that up to the activity tolerance, cognitive tolerance, and monitoring the heart rate is very much so like part of that autonomic component or autonomic system, not being able to respond to exercise in the way that you should. Like you shouldn't have this massive heart rate peak going 1 mile an hour. Like you walk faster than 1 mile per hour,
Yeah.
to get from the clinic to your car. Right. So, yeah, realizing, hey, the treadmill is not the modality right now, but, and especially like, as an athlete, like it's not fulfilling to walk 1 mile an hour. Like that didn't make sense. Like even from a, like a joyful experience for you. Like I want people to seek meaning in what they're doing. And like, that's not going to be very meaningful to you. So, I remember we transitioned, we were like, the bike is probably going to be better now. Like
Yeah.
you can pedal your legs at a rate that like is going to at least feel and like resonate with you as like exercise or like I'm doing something, and be able to stay within the parameters of like the heart rate and boundaries that we were setting for you through that progression, better than it was going to be to just, I think, probably build up immense frustration on your part walking that slowly on a treadmill.
Yeah, that was so true. And I even remember going home when I did have to eventually, unfortunately, get cut off from you and cut off from everything here in Miami. And I went home to just try to basically go off the grid and heal completely and rest and everything. And I remember I got a Fitbit though, because I wanted to keep track of my heart rate, because I wanted to still try to do some things. And so I would walk around my cul-de-sac at home, and I would walk very, very slow, as we just mentioned, very, very slow. But I remember at the end of that break, it was like, I mean, months later now, this was 5 months into being injured. And it was in January, like middle of January. I had my concussion started in September, early September. Middle of January, I was not completely healed yet, but I was beginning to walk a little faster and having a little more mobility. And I was feeling a little more like myself, not as depressed, not as anxious. And my goal during Christmas break and during that time home before coming back to Miami for spring semester was to walk up the hill in my neighborhood, because I live in Georgia, so it's nothing like flat Florida and flat Miami, but I have this huge big hill in my neighborhood, and I had a goal of, I'm going to do that hill before I go back to Miami. And I remember like 2 days before I went back, I went up and down that hill, and that was like the Rocky on top of the stairs moment, like hands up, like so excited. Did I go super slow? Yes. Like, did I run up the hill? No, but I went up the hill and I came down, and my heart rate did not go through the roof like it had been, even walking that 1 mile per hour back in Miami months before. And it was just those little things that I think speak so much to playing where your feet are. And it's those moments where you mentioned how, hey, I can't do the grocery store video right now, or even the grocery store in real life, but I can bike. It's still slow, but I can bike. I cannot increase my headaches too dramatically, and I can keep my heart rate down. And it's just understanding the things that you can do rather than focusing on the things that you can't do. It's playing where your feet are, doing the best where you're at, no matter what and no matter where. And I think that's one thing that you do perfectly as well, because, you're not dealing with these injuries personally. You are treating these injuries, you're helping through these injuries, and you're seeing a lot of patients who are in the most vulnerable times of their lives. I mean, at least I was. It was the hardest time of my life. It was the most difficult time. It was the worst headspace I had ever been in my entire life. And you were there with me. And you were a bright light in that moment too. So I just want to talk about how you also play where your feet are in the roles that you play. And so one thing I want to touch on first is just, you are dealing with these patients in vulnerable times of their lives. And so how do you approach your clients? How do you approach the people that you see, knowing that you want to impact them, not only in their medical space that they're going through, but beyond that as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that is like primarily what fueled me to get into this specialty. Is that I take, it's a big responsibility. It's a big honor to be able to, be in someone's life during a tough time and to be part of that journey. Like I well recognize that when someone comes in an eval to see me, like they typically don't want to be there. Like that's not where they would have chosen for their lives, like to be at that time. I mean, people want to be getting better, but like they wish that they didn't have to be seeing me in the first place. And so that's not something that like I take very lightly. Like I know when I'm approaching people, when I'm meeting people for the first time, It's typically because something in their life has been significantly altered in some way, and people are feeling really vulnerable, and people are feeling out of control. Like they've lost control, like they do not have that sense of autonomy and control in their lives. And I feel like I'm, blessed to have a job where I'm motivated to help people take control again, and to help, people maybe accept the circumstance or the cards that life dealt them, but to move forward, um, with it or despite it, and the fact that they don't have to do it alone. Like they're not going to be on this journey alone, and that I'm going to be there with them. And if I don't have the answer, I will find somebody who does have the answer. And so that's not something that I take lightly as a healthcare professional and just as a human being. And it's definitely something that motivates me every single day that I come into work, is knowing that I've you know am humbled to be part of that process for somebody else. And I'm, you know it's a hard job, but it's a very fulfilling job in that way.
I love that. And more ways that you've really learned to play where your feet are over this past year specifically has been through telehealth and your new experience with telehealth, because that's something where it's so interesting playing where your feet are, because your feet are literally on the other end of a phone, and like you're working, you're working electronically. So your feet are not even with the person that you're working with, but you're still playing where your feet are. You're still working to impact their lives, to make their lives better. And so talk a little bit just about the experience with telehealth and the challenges and the great things that has brought to your career and just learning experience as well.
Yeah, that was a crazy shift, right? I think that was so crazy. And I remember, like being in a department of physical therapy, there's lots of different specialties. And I just like really remember people being like, well, there's no way that you can do this in neuro. And I was like, I think you can. Like, and I think I need to. Like, I don't have a choice. Like, if I want to be able to reach people, this is how I have to reach them. And so, we're reaching out to people who I'd been seeing in clinic, trying to see if we could get things set up with technology. And amongst all of this process, like, living and learning in my own house, like, how can I recreate these exercises with what I just have in my kitchen? How can I recreate, meaningful training with the resources that I have in my place, in my environment, because that is what I'm going to be asking everybody else to do. And so it was a day to day like learning curve. And God bless the grace and the patience that the people working with me were giving me, and even their insights and creativities to like, hey, I have this idea and this is what I want to train. Like, what do you have in your house that you think would be helpful for this? And just like being able to have that collaborative and teamwork process, really kickstarted what has become a long lasting and extremely productive telehealth program that we now have running at the University of Miami. And we can reach so many people who may not have otherwise been able to have access to services. I've worked with people who are all over Florida, all over rural Florida, who don't have the opportunity to come to a big academic medical institution like the University of Miami to see specialists, but they need specialized care. And so even being able to do sessions with them to help guide them and build like a list of resources that they need for their best management, and then help them find places that they can seek that, or build a program with me via telehealth if that's the safest option, has really been, I think, a necessary part to neuro rehab, and a part that's been missing on so many factors. Because I think a beautiful thing about telehealth is that you start off a session where you're not together, and you are able to see this confidence and the self-efficacy build in the people across the screen from you, to know that like they can do this without you being there. They can do this without being in that gym. They have the resources within themselves to do this, to take this on, and to continue to work towards their goals. So there's just, what started as like a very scary and daunting, like, oh my God, how am I going to do this, has turned into like such a beautiful way to deliver care. And so it's been truly, truly a blessing to have been kind of thrown into that journey, and to take it and run with it, because that was the only way I was going to be able to help people. And I live to help people. Like, that's my service calling. And so being able to take that and run with it, um, build the program that we have at and then kind of get involved in these other levels of telehealth advocacy through the Academy of Neurologic Physical Therapy, and research, has just been a very unexpected twist to my career. But such a beautiful twist, because it definitely feeds everything that I stand for in terms of values, which is, again, letting people realize that they have the resources within themselves to take this new next step of their journey on, head on, and that they don't need me, but they have it within themselves. So it's been a really fun and unexpected part to my career.
I think that's so cool. And I feel like even you talk so much about the patients building their confidence in the little things that they can do. And that really is a lot about playing where your feet are, really is too. It's realizing in those moments that I was facing, like I said, my arena was no longer 3 volleyball courts, an Olympic weight room, an outdoor track, looking to win an ACC championship and getting ACC accolades and being the starting, middle for the University of Miami. My arena that I was playing in was now vestibular therapy, cognitive therapy, psychological therapy. It was trying to do those exercises with the little X's, looking and focusing on that ruler. It was trying to bike. It was trying to walk. And in my time that I was going through it, I didn't do a very good job playing where my feet were, or really realizing the impact of that. But now that I'm out of it, I've learned the importance of that. And I've learned the confidence that you can gain from doing those little things and getting good at those little things, and knowing that, hey, I'm not there yet, but I'm here. And this is where my feet are, and I'm going to play where my feet are, and I'm going to do the best with even the little things. I'm going to do the best where I'm at, no matter what, no matter where. And I think that's what you did too, because you were thrown into this situation of, how in the world am I going to do this online? Yet you did. You learned. You're building a program around it now. Like, you're so influential in this space about telehealth and neurotherapy. And I think that your confidence has also grown. And just the way you speak about it, your eyes are lighting up, you're smiling while you're talking about it. You clearly have a passion for this. And I just think it's incredible, again, how you've taken this time, space, and year to also play where your feet are, while you're encouraging your patients to play where their feet are too. And so I want to ask you, after having this podcast, this conversation, what does play where your feet are mean to you?
Yeah, I think so. It means to me like doing the best that we can each given day. And I think giving yourself the grace to know that the best that I have today is going to be different than the best that I have tomorrow, or the best that I did yesterday. And being able to have that grace and forgiveness for yourself, and just do what it is that you can on that day. And I feel like I have so many people who come to me or work with me, and they'll be like, I'm so sorry that I'm not doing this exercise as good as I was the other day before. And I always am like, why are you apologizing to me for showing up on a day where you didn't feel the best, and for doing everything that you could in that day? Like, you never need to apologize to me for giving it your all, because giving it your all today is going to be the reason that you achieve your goals in the future. And so I feel like that whole like mindset and approach is exactly that. It's playing where your feet are, in every single moment. And I also want to reflect, like, I love the name of this podcast, and I love everything you're doing with it. And I feel like we always talk about it in the way where it's kind of like digging out of the trenches, like play where your feet are in like undesirable circumstances. But like, you also need to play where your feet are when things are going well for you. Like, how are you going to use that space or that success, or, that arena that you're in when you are thriving, to make a difference, and to impact the environment and the world around you in a positive way, or to grow towards your own goals in a positive way when things are going really well. So I think, on both ends of the token, playing where your feet are requires a lot of self-awareness. It requires a lot of reflection, and it requires a lot of faith. And I would say that's what that means to me.
I love that. That's so good. I love the distinction you made between, it's not only when you're trying to get out of the trenches, it's when you're on the highs, it's when you're on the mountaintops. You got to play where your feet are then too. And that's kind of what playing where your feet are is. It's because wherever your feet are, if your feet are in the valley, you play where your feet are. If your feet are on the mountaintops, you play where your feet are, because that's where your feet are. And you just got to play where your feet are. And that's so good though. I mean, I'm talking about grace, talking about forgiveness for yourself, talking about how your best one day might be different than your best the next day. It's still your best, but it just varies from day to day. And I think that's so important. That's one thing I've certainly learned since going through everything I've gone through, of just my best will always be my best. And I will push myself as hard as I can, and I will show up and show out. Sometimes that may just look differently. And sometimes like right now, my voice is raspy. I have a cold. I'm feeling a little low. I'm not maybe as energetic as I always am, but I'm still going to give my best. It may not be the most premier top high Cameron Dobbs you might receive, but it's still my best that I can give in this moment. So thank you just for saying all that. I thought that was incredible. We're for sure going to take like a little snippet of that and put it on Instagram when we post this podcast, because that was definitely a good little mic drop over there. But well, let me ask you, as we continue to wrap up here, other people are listening to this podcast, and I'm sure learning so much about concussions and therapy and vestibular therapy and different aspects of concussions and different symptoms of concussion and different neurological just aspects of everything with concussions and brain injuries that go on. And on top of that, though, I'm sure they're really learning how to play where their feet are too, or maybe being inspired to play where their feet are, like you do and like you always have done. And so what advice would you have for them who want to also play where their feet are?
I would say, to anybody, that remember that you have more resources within yourself than you know, and then that you probably give yourself credit for. And that you can take control of your day to day. You can take that control back. And that may start with small wins, but it will grow to bigger wins and bigger wins. And so I think it's like when you feel like you have lost control, when you feel like you cannot control, I want people to know that you can and that you will, because you have the resources within you and you've had them there all along. And so again, just going into every situation, giving your best that you have in that moment, knowing that that is exactly what you are needed to do and you are not expected to do anything else. And that those efforts, the best that you have each day, is what's going to take you to where you want to be.
Amen. I love that so much. That reminded me of my church down here. My worship leader, she has a song called God of Purpose, and it talks about how, God, you have me in the perfect place. And so wherever your feet are, there's purpose where you're at. There's purpose in the position that you're playing in. There's purpose in the time of life that you're going through, the season that you're in. And that's why we play where our feet are. That's why we're intentional in those moments, because we know that God has placed us there in those moments for a reason, for a purpose, and we can make impact wherever our feet are. Emily, that was absolutely incredible. Any other thoughts you want to just drop in, gold nuggets of wisdom as we wrap up?
No, I don't know. I mean, I'm just so thankful that you kept in touch with me. You mentioned earlier, like the things where you would touch base. Like, I remember distinctively hearing from you in January before you came back to Miami. And like, you told me that you had like a series of days without a headache. And you told me that you had been doing your walking and activities. And like, I remember those text messages, and those text messages just like would fuel me in so many ways that like you were probably unaware of. And then, getting to reach out, you reached out last year. And then finally we got to meet like on National Concussion Awareness Day of all freaking days. Like,
totally unplanned, by the way. We did not even know that. We had this like I don't know how long we talked, like an hour or so, just catching up on life and talking about the potential of doing this podcast together. And then we end and you text me like 5 minutes after and you're like, it's National Concussion Awareness Day. And I was like, what? Oh, it was like so perfect. It's just so storybook like moment for sure.
Yeah. And it's just beautiful, like getting to see you and and all of the beautiful things you're accomplishing. Like you mentioned earlier, like just to get through my normal life, like I would say what you're doing is anything but normal. And it is so, so good to see you just really attacking life head on. And again, so humbled to have you, think of me to be like a part of this podcast. So I just wanted to say thank you.
Of course. Thank you. Seriously, I love just connecting with you again. And we joked about it last time, but I was telling you, I was like, I'm so sorry that you had to deal with me during that time of being so I was depressed. I was full of anxiety. I was irritable with every person I ran into. I could barely do anything. And so we were joking, just like, I'm so thankful you can now see me as the person that I truly believe I am, 99% of the time, of just being a lot more energetic, being a lot more positive, being a lot more enjoyable to be around than I was during that season of my life. So I'm just thankful that we are able to still connect and continue talking and continue furthering our relationship, even past, the client relationship that we had before. Well,
yeah, and I was going to say, I'll just say thank you for trusting me in those moments, but also for like trusting me now. Like, thank you for picking me during the lows and thank you for picking me during the highs. So I really appreciate that.
Of course. Well, I love you so much. I think you really are incredible. I would not have you on the podcast if I did not think that. So this is truly genuine. The fact that, you really did make an impact in my life. You really were a light for me during that entire experience. Though it was so tough going through vestibular therapy and just tough on top of everything I was facing, I really did enjoy seeing Emily 3 times a week. And like, my parents loved you and everyone loved you. Everyone who meets Emily loves Emily. So I'm sure that all of our listeners think the same thing today. But people probably want to get connected with you after this. They probably want to learn more, or at least I hope they want to get connected. I hope they want to continue learning more about the brain and different things that we face, whether it's good or bad with concussions or just in general. And so how can people follow you? How can people get connected? And how can people learn more?
Yeah. Okay. So I am not very good at social media, but I am on social media. So I'm on Instagram. And I can send you the details, but it's at Yo Emily. Very, very wonderful and well thought. But even more so, you can get connected with our team. I help to run our at UM NeuroPT Instagram account. So I would send people there. And then also just like for other resources and research, if people do want to learn more outside of me, there's a lot of good stuff going on and good avenues for being connected with the community on social media. So I want to shout out at Molly Parker PT. She is on Instagram. She also runs the Concussion Compass program, which is very, very supportive. She's actually a physical therapist who had post-concussive syndrome herself. And so I would definitely refer people there. And then also at Reactive PT has tons of information and a really good concussion program as well. So I'm sure, if you go to those pages, you'll find other resources, but those are two that I'm, very familiar with. And so those are some good places to look and how you can get connected to me.
Amazing. And we'll put all of that in the podcast description below. We'll make sure we link everything so people can easily find all those resources. And I'm certainly going to go and just go follow all those people you just mentioned too. I obviously already follow you, but I love learning more myself. I've been through this experience, but I still am always seeking to learn more information and just learn more about other people's experiences too. Because as we mentioned in the very beginning of this, each experience with each person and each concussion is so different than the other. And so I think just continuing to gain knowledge of this for all of us is so, so important and so beneficial. But Emily, Thank you so much for being on the PWYFA Play Where Your Feet Are podcast. Any final last words before we log off?
No. Enjoy the fall.
Enjoy the fall. Emily's enjoying the fall weather, the fall climate, the fall clothing. She's over here. You guys can't see, but she's over here in like a nice little crew neck sweatshirt, and I'm literally here in like a tank top, being hot in Miami. Like it's October 16th, and here we are. But,
No, I'm like, I need to go get like the Starbucks new like apple crisp drink so I can like drink it in the atmosphere that it was intended for. Like this is where my brain is right now.
all the fall vibes, all of it, every single bit of it. I love it. Emily, thank you again so much for being on the podcast. I appreciate you so much. I think this episode is going to impact so many people. I learned a lot going through it, and I've been through it before. So thank you again for sharing your knowledge, for playing where your feet are, and just continuing to impact others no matter what and no matter where.
Thank you so much.
Bye, Em.
Bye.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the PWYFA Play Where Your Feet Are podcast with Dr. Emily Schultz today. Make sure you guys go click the links in the description. I made sure to put down all of her information as well as those resources she mentioned. And while you're at it, go ahead and check out Play Where Your Feet Are on all those platforms too, whether it's Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, whatever it might be. We want you to find us on those platforms so you don't miss a thing about the podcast, merchandise, the book, and more. Thanks so much again for tuning in to another episode of the PWYFA Play Where Your Feet Are podcast. You guys, of course, are watching it here on YouTube, but I do want to remind you that we are streaming on all podcast platforms. So yes, you can watch and see us engage, but you can also listen if you prefer that as well. Thanks again for tuning in. Have a great day, be blessed, and play where your feet are.